Hi, this is Kelly from The Truth in Story, and today, per special request from Monsoon Magic, I am going to do a review of the Steampunk Tarot. Now, you'll see here, I had to bring this one out, although I think the other books of the series I have on my Kindle. But here we have a wonderful example that I would highly recommend if you want to have some fun and get a really good read. This is Soulless, an Alexia Terabody novel by Gail Carriger. Now, I love this down here in pink. A novel of vampires, werewolves, and parasols. And that really about sums up this particular book. And I did really think that the backing was great too. Alexia Terabody is laboring under a great many social tribulations. First, she has no soul. Second, she's a spinster whose father is both Italian and dead. Third, she was rudely attacked by a vampire, breaking all standards of social etiquette. I just think that's fantastic. And here's a picture of the author drinking her tea. So, I think this is a lot of fun, and actually I'm going to reread this. I could use some, non-heavy brain reading, but still be good, and this is a perfect example of that. There are, I want to say, there's at least 3, and I think there may be 4 actually currently out. So I need to reread the first 3 and then get the 4th one. But I highly recommend it. And as we saw in the Chariot, and we'll see again here, the Chariot is holding a parasol, and it was Barbara Moore's nod to another set of books, as well as to Alexia and her steampunked parasol that has weapons and all kinds of goodies hidden in it. So I couldn't do a review of the Steampunk Tarot without a quick little look at this particular book, because I am a massive reader, both in books and obviously in tarot cards. So I had to at least point that out before we got started. So I don't have the box currently. I do have over here a beautiful old pipe that my sister had picked up for me. And this is my great-great-grandfather's watch, I believe. I can't remember the number of greats, but that's his watch. It just seemed to work better than crystals and candles for the theme. This is, I'll have to do a video sometime on the stones that have migrated onto each of my decks, because I do keep my decks for the most part out. I don't think my Rider-Waite Smith is out. I keep that in a box, mostly because of space. I'll need to open up another cubicle if I want to keep them all out. But most of my decks are kept out on a pile with a stone on top. And I bought a bunch of stones that kind of called out to me, both in a shop and then online, thinking of specific stones for specific decks. But they didn't always stay with their decks that I thought they would stay, and some have migrated to different ones. But this particular one is an onyx, and it is quite happy to stay on this deck when it's out and about. So I have that there. So what we are talking with much rambling before we even get started, we're talking about the beautiful Steampunk Tarot by Barbara Moore with illustrations by Ali Fell. And I will say with the guidebook that this is a fantastic guidebook. I do find that Barbara Moore's guidebooks are quite well done, and this one is no exception. And I want to point out from right at the beginning that while this is certainly a themed deck, although in some degree almost every deck, if it's not the original or a literal reworking of the original images, in some degree every deck is a themed deck, because most decks do have a cohesive theme that the cards are working around, whether it's Shadowscape with that sort of dreamy, fairy, beautiful fae energy that you certainly get with mermaids and all that kind of stuff, or even the druid craft. You know, that theme is druidry and Wicca kind of put together into druid craft. So in a sense, almost every deck has some sort of a theme, but there are certain decks that seem like theme decks in that there is a very specific theme that comes over the top of them, where you almost feel like, okay, is this really a workable deck, or is this just kind of artistic and something to collect? Where I really wasn't entirely sure which that was, you know, whether that was the case with this one or not, but I will say that this is a quite readable deck, and I will say that the theme doesn't just sit there being artsy. A lot of times it actually has something to say about tarot and another viewpoint to come at it that actually adds to the discussion of tarot. So I really am quite impressed with this particular deck. I do have some tabs on here just so I could quickly find, this is the start of the Major Arcana, which has a full-size picture of the card. And then here we have a page. So each one has about a page and a half of text. So we have a good long description, and then we have a reading tip. There's lots of reading tips, and each of the cards also, here we go, here's the beginning actually of the Major Arcana. Each of the cards in the book has the title of the card. It has sort of a quote. So for this one, it's up here, everything looks a little magical. Then it has a core meaning, the moment before the first step is taken, which a lot of these core meanings I think come from previous Barbara Moore smaller book that I have on Kindle that just kind of goes over the meanings of I can't remember what it's called. It's sort of like a beginner's or a basic guide to the tarot meanings, because I've seen these before. And then it goes into the description of the card, and then it goes into reading tips, which I've actually found quite helpful. That if it shows up with certain cards, it can mean something else. So like this one, the idea of fresh starts and new beginnings in the Fool is emphasized if one or more of the aces or pages are also present. The suits of these cards can give an indication of the pertinent area of life. Coupled with one or more of the knights, the chariot, the eight of cups, or the six of swords, travel can be indicated. So each one has sort of these tips that in terms of how you would use this actually reading in conjunction with other cards, which I think is quite interesting. And then when we get to the Minor Arcana, we have the same thing. We have a large image, so a great deal of work goes into each one of these cards, whether it is the Major or the Minor. And then we have the court cards are separated off, and we have what's quite interesting and has been helpful because it does kind of go into the pages just in general. So okay, well, this is the information we need to know about the pages, and then it goes into each of the pages separately. And then the same thing with the knights. It really talks about the knight sets of cards and how to read them, tips for reading the knights in general, and then it goes into each one of the knights. Same queens, same thing with the kings, and then we do get some spreads. We have, you know, 3 card, we have a 7 card here, a most excellent and sensible spreads, complete with moving parts, kind of gives the feel of the steampunk. We have the panoramic photograph, we have an engine spread, then she gives sample reading, and then sort of a farewell. So it's quite inclusive, and she does give an introduction to the steampunk genre, which I think is great. You know, she gives nods to the great, you know, Jules Verne, Mary Shelley, H.G. Wells, sort of as the beginners of science fiction, which is quite accurate and wonderful. And then it talks about how those writers explored their world would be like if certain as yet to be invented technologies existed. And she talks about how the term steampunk wasn't used until the 1980s. When you had people, and then here's our nod to Gail Carriger, which I think is fantastic. She also explores some other ones like Cherie Priest's Bone Shaker, which isn't set in so much Victorian England, but in Seattle. So she does kind of go into, and she actually, I didn't even see that there, but she actually goes into the idea, is it more than a novelty deck? So I guess that would be the term versus theme, because like I said, most decks have some overriding theme, but there are certain decks that novelty is a good word for that, where you wonder if it's just a novelty deck for collection or if it's really something you can work. And she makes a, I do remember reading this. She does make a really good case for the fact that this is much more than a novelty deck. And I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And this is a fantastic resource. Now, if you, I do have the, I do have the app for the Steampunk Tarot, which again is fantastic because it not only has all the cards that you can zoom in and look at, but if you go, all of these, Fool's Dog, if you go into the Explore, you can look at the cards themselves. So when you hit the card, you can look at the meaning, and then you can look at the full text from the book. You can also go straight to the book and you have the entire contents of this guidebook right in your phone for studying, or yeah, mostly I use it mostly for studying, or if I want to quickly look up a specific card. Sometimes it's easier just to find it on my phone than it is to dig through to go get the guidebook or whatever. I always have my phone right there. So guidebook, fantastic. App, very helpful. I highly recommend both of those. And I want to say the app for that was $3.99 on the Android. I'm assuming it would be somewhat similar to for Apple. Now, the backs of the cards are not reversible, and Barbara Moore in this book, and I have another one of hers, I want to say it's Tarot of the Hidden Realms. Yeah. She doesn't use reversals, and she doesn't really advocate using reversals in the decks, particular decks that I have. And the backs of these are definitely not, they're gorgeous, but they're definitely not reversible. You have each of the suit signs there in a bunch of gear work that is just stunning, but it's clearly not reversible. But again, I mean, this all depends on how you lay cards out. I don't ever lay cards out like this and then flip. I don't read reversals, but I don't lay my cards like that. These are the knights because I wanted to talk about them. I always lay cards. I pull from the top of the deck. Here's a little lesson of how I pull. I pull from like this, but I always flip my cards because I want to see the whole spread as a whole as I'm doing it, so I don't tend to read each card in isolation. So for me, even if I was going to read reversals, the backs are, whether the backs are reversible or not wouldn't really matter. But if that does matter to you, then be aware of that. The guidebook does not go into reverse meanings. I did lay these out this way. Now they are quite... Here's the Ace of Cups, which is gorgeous. They are a little bit glossy. They're not horribly glossy, but they definitely have a gloss to them. Not as much as some. They do have a thin black border, which I don't find to be distracting, although I am tempted to cut up them and trim them off just because I think they'd be stunning. But having recently had a little bit of a snafu with my Paulina Tarot, I'm a little bit leery at the moment of doing that, but I could actually do it. It wouldn't really change the back of the card. So that could be something that I do in the future, but this border being black does really work with the theme of the deck quite beautifully. So there we have that. They are a little bit, so for not being super glossy, they are fairly slippy. Like the stacks didn't really want to stay stacked. They started sliding all over. So they do have a little bit of slip, but they shuffle beautifully, which is very important to me. I laid them out like this because I just thought, for me, I thought the aces are particularly beautiful, and they all sort of have that metal. We've got the metal hand with the pentacle. I love the sword one, which we'll get into each of them as we look at them. This one really, I don't know if any of you are gamers. I've always been a big gamer, and back in the, I have no clue. I'm not even going to guess. I would say 90s, early 90s maybe. There was a game called Myst. And this card just reminds me of Myst with this piece of machinery here. Myst was very much a steampunk feel to it in a way, because you did have sort of this surreal atmosphere, but then you had very much a lot of steam and power and interesting puzzles that you had to do that felt like, you know, old but modern mechanics to them. So that definitely had a steampunky feel, and this card really looks like Myst. And there's actually books of the Myst series as well, in case you wanted to know that. And so I do think that the aces are beautiful, and wanted to, you know, showcase that fact. And then the other set of cards that really stood out to me that I wanted to showcase before going through all of the cards were the Knights. Now, the Knights of Pentacles, you know, here we have sort of an explorer, sort of a Victorian age explorer. You know, that was the age of exploration of like Africa and such. And so we certainly have that with the Knight. But other than this Knight of Pentacles, the Knights are women, which I really love. I love this Knight of Wands. How amazing and Victorian and gender bending I think is that. That's just fantastic. I do think that's an amazing Knight of Wands. And then here we have the Knight of Cups, looking quite dapper. And then we have the Knight of Swords, who is definitely ready to take off on an adventure and has her plans intact. So I do really like how the Knights are, for the most part, all female, which is quite interesting. So I did want to point that out, and I wanted to just show you how beautiful the aces looked together. Now, here we have the Major Arcana, and some of these cards are quite dark, so I'm hoping that I may have to adjust the light so that you can see them better. I do think the Fool, well, there's a couple of them where they're quite dark, so we'll see how the lighting holds out. I've done a review through my card comparison. I've gone through, let's see, we just did the Chariot this week. So there are in-depth look at the first of 7, well, plus the Fool. So these are already up, and I will put a link to the Steampunk section of the card comparison if you want to see those in particular. So I'm not going to try not to go into too much depth, particularly maybe watch the Fool, because this for me is all, sorry about that with the road noise. This for me is all Bert from Mary Poppins, and it works beautifully at the Fool as the Fool. I go quite into it in the card look at this particular card of the Fool. I think it's stunning. I love that the sun is coming up and we still have the stars, so it's really that literal, just the edge of the new day. We still have the white dog. We have all the steam, you know, that sort of industrialized feel, because it is steampunk. I just think it's a beautiful card. And when I first unboxed this deck in my car, because as I've said, I generally very thoroughly research, very thoroughly look into something before I actually buy the deck. And I had with this one, and it was definitely on my okay list, but it wasn't high on my list. There were other decks that I wanted to get first, but I had seen it in a bookstore in person and just ended up snagging it. And I sat in the parking lot and opened it up, and I must not have seen the Fool before I'd actually opened the deck, and I just laughed. I literally laughed out loud because I was just like, there's Bert, who is a perfect example of the Fool. So there we have the Fool. And then we have the Magician, and some of them are quite simple. We've noticed, or as we were going through the card comparison, there were a couple where, you know, there wasn't a whole lot going on just in terms of comparing the symbols to other cards that we were looking at, but it gets the message across. So this is the Magician, and we don't have a ton going on, but it's enough, and it has all the components that you need for the Magician. Now here I will say I'm still working to try to get a hold of Llewellyn to maybe get a replacement for this card, because I do not want to have to buy this whole deck because of this one card. That would just kill me. There's too many other decks that I would rather spend the money on. So I'm going to work very hard to see if I can get this replaced. But in the making of the High Priestess series, this fell on the floor. My puppy snatched it and did some work on it, which is quite sad. But I am trying not to dwell because she is absolutely adorable and I have to forgive and let go. But this is a really cool card because we actually have a tarot reader as the High Priestess. Here we have the Empress, which is quite a difference if you look at the Empress card comparison. This is quite a different Empress than the other one, and I apologize for my phone. It's vibrating. And we'll need to put that on silence instead of vibrate, or not have it on the table, I guess. So here we have the Empress, which I said is quite different than the other Empress cards in my collection, and quite interesting. That might be worth taking a look at that. The Emperor didn't have, it was another one of those that didn't have a lot going on, but everything that you need to know really about the Emperor is here, except for the tie-in with his the power of nature. That's really not there. That's the only thing that I would say is really missing. Other than that, I mean, you can access, but there's not a lot going on with that card. I do really like the Hierophant. He looks so friendly. The Lovers I was quite impressed with. This had so much tie-in from the original, as well as some added layers of meanings. I loved how they used this sort of light post with the flames and replacement of the flaming tree that's in the Rider-Waite-Smith. I was really impressed with this card. And then here is the Chariot, which started all with her parasol, with the direct nod to Alexia in the Parasol Protectorate set of novels, and what started all of this for me. This has got to be one of my favorite of all time strength cards. And this card really shifted I've talked about it in a couple, and I have no clue. They were just randomly inserted, I guess, in other particular videos. But this idea of the animal as being sort of our shadow self that Barbara Moore has in more than one of her decks. It's also certainly in the Hidden Realms deck. But that idea and also the idea of the strength coming from healing. So in the process of healing ourselves or other people is where we gain strength from, I think is absolutely stunning and really opened up my view of a card that I already loved. But this, we're going to be doing this next in the card comparison series, and I can't wait to look through it. But this is one of my all-time favorite strength cards. Here we have the Hermit. This is one I'm a little unsure if it's very dark, but oh, he's so powerful and wizardy. But then we have sort of the industrialized city in the background, the clock tower, and he's kind of standing on discarded gears. His wand and staff has got gear work in it. It's just stunning, so evocative. There's so much going on with that you can do with sort of this idea of an industrialized world and sort of that consumer world, and because a lot of times we have, like we see here, where he's just standing on sort of almost like he's in the rubbish of the city that we see below. It's almost like he's standing in a dump or something, because we have all this discarded machinery. And so there are a couple different cards that are like that, that really kind of add that layer in, that I think is quite fascinating. Here we have the Wheel of Fortune with the astrological signs. We have the elements here. We have the planetary signs. We have a pentagram here on the third gear also. I think it's quite simple, and yet has a lot going on, which is a lot of times what I find with this particular deck, is that some of the cards are quite simple when you really start looking at these symbologies, but then they really do pack a wallop. Here we have Justice. And I love, you need to watch when you're going, if you get this particular deck, pay attention, because tarot cards show up in quite a few cards, which in quite a fascinating way. And so she's dropping these cards onto the scale. It almost looks like I'm quite excited when we get to the card comparison for this card as well, because I think this is quite evocative. Here we have the Hanged Man. I love how they use the stained glass to create the halo over his head. And the old brick feel, and the old pipes. I just love this. Here's Death. We have a man sort of in the background at a cemetery. We still have the traditional horse. And she has the sickle also. Quite beautiful card. Love, 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 love Temperance in this deck. How beautiful is that? You've got the kind of water gear work going on, and but she still has, she's got a foot on dry land and a foot in water. There is so much that remains the same. There is so much that remains the same, but in just a very different world. Although even this landscape has just a gorgeous, old painting style, and then all of a sudden, then we do have metal and gear work and sort of the clothing there. So it's just beautiful. Here we have the Devil, and I love this because we have this kind of Frankenstein sense in terms of we have this inventor and his probably apprentice who have created their own monster and then not, really known what to do with it. It's kind of gotten out of control. And how wonderful is that for the idea of the Devil card? I just think that's just awesome. Here we have the Tower, which is quite beautiful. The Star, just stunning. Here we have the Moon, which again is quite similar in ways. We do have the Lobster here. I love that we have the spotlights, kind of Batman style, shining on the moon, and then you've got that light that's coming straight down. That's quite interesting. We also have a dog here and a cat, so quite an interesting moon. Then we have the Sun, who almost looks like he's the fool that's gotten lucky. The same little white dog. We have Judgment with her gramophone. And then we have the World card. We've got the elemental signs going on here, She's quite beautiful, and in a way, in some ways, quite different than the rest. Just in terms of clothing, she's much more of, almost has clothing that looks like, you know, a beautiful belly dancing type Arabian style outfit, which is quite different than the other clothes that we see in this deck. So that's quite interesting. Even her shoes, I just noticed that. She's even got little curled up, kind of like the Arabian Nights curled up toes. So there we have the World. So that's the major arcana. I think they're beautiful. There's not really any one that I just like. The Sun is not my favorite rendition of the Sun. But other than that, I think they're all quite stunning. And it's not like it's horrible. It's just not really my favorite style. But otherwise, I mean, they're just stunning. I love this particular deck. Okay, I've put the knights back into their particular card set so that we could take a run through the minor arcana. So here we have the Ace of Wands, the Two of Wands. Hopefully we can see these. The Three of Wands. I think this is quite a stunning card with the fog, and we've got the lanterns going on here, and we have him sort of sighting out to sea. We can see steamboats in the water. I just think that's a beautiful card. Four of Wands, quite traditional. Like some of them are quite to the Rider. Most of them, I will say, are quite to the Rider-Waite Smith. And we have the Five of Wands, the Six of Wands on his metal horse, the Seven of Wands, quite beautiful. I love this Eight of Wands. You definitely get this quick movement in the Eight of Wands. You know, it's shooting off all eight at once, and sort of even the different colors and the different types. Some are flaming and some are not. Different woods, different metals. I think that's quite interesting. Here we have the Nine of Wands. I love this Ten of Wands, because she has her light that she's kind of using to guide her, but she also has tarot cards that are on the ground that that is guiding her along on her path. So I think that's quite wonderful. Here we have the Page of Wands. I want to say that most of, or all of the pages might be women as well. There's definitely a great nod to strong female characters in this deck. There's both. In fact, there's one, I want to say it's the Three of Cups, where you have three very different women. They're kind of sitting around together and celebrating, but very different in terms of, you know, one is more dressed in a dress, and one, which we'll get to it, I guess I won't talk about it much, but there is sort of a nod to the various directions that women can go with and still be coming from their seat of power, but can be coming at it from different, or going outwards with it in different ways, that I think is quite fascinating in this deck. Here's that Knight of Wands that I said is just stunning. Even have the Egyptian hieroglyphs here. You know, that sort of exploration and romanticizing of Egypt was so prevalent at this time. We have the Queen of Wands. I love that she's kind of dressed in a traditional riding attire, but she's seated astride the horse. She's not seated side saddle. That lends strength, I think, to this image. And then we have the King of Wands. The kings, I feel like, aren't doing quite so much all the time, although I will say in the descriptions they tend to make sense, because again, she does such a great job with the descriptions. So there we have the wands. Of course, my favorite suit is the swords. I already talked about how I just feel like this is an image out of Myst, the computer game. Here we have the Two of Swords. I love the Two of Swords, this in general as a card. This is not my absolute favorite, although I do think it's quite stunning. But it's it has a sort of circus feel to it that is not generally in keeping with the rest of the deck even so much. So it's kind of from, especially the swords, because the swords tend to be, well, I guess not all of them. There's a lot of like airships. No, see, you also have that. So I guess not so much. I kind of get this more this airship feel with the swords, which then we have this kind of random circusy feel one, which I think is a little bit different. It's, again, it's a beautiful card. It's just because I love the Two of Swords card in general so much. This isn't my favorite version of it, but I do think it's stunning. Again, same thing with Three of Hearts. I love this idea here because we have the swords sort of lodged into the gear works here, but we have the sense that if we pull the swords out, the gears will start working again, if that makes sense, that I really think is stunning in this particular card. The Four of Swords. I love the addition of the hourglass there. You know, it kind of really evokes that sense of, okay, you know, it's for a time, you know, take a rest for a time, but you have to keep moving still. The Five of Swords. The Six of Swords. So we still have that sense of kind of escaping or leaving with somebody's help, but they're in an airship. What can be more wonderful than an airship? Here we have the Seven of Swords, the Eight of Swords, one of my favorite cards also, the Nine of Swords. All the swords, it's probably hard to see because it's dark, but all the knives have different handles on them. Kind of evoke some of the different other cards that you see of this one. And here we have the Ten of Swords. And one of the things I think is interesting about this is it's almost like he's back up on the rooftop where the Fool was. Although it's definitely a different rooftop because we get a different angle to the city. I wonder if I can... I thought this was actually in the distance. Oh, I think that's it right there, actually, yeah. So it's a different angle from the Fool, but I think that's quite interesting. Seems like an old like murder mystery. He's got his briefcase down here, and it's sort of okay, who did it? Feel to it, but I love the Page of Swords. She looks like she can take care of anything. She's just ready to get into her air balloon. Just love it. Knight of Swords, like we saw, very competent, strong woman. And she's one of the ones I want to say that shows up in the Three of Cups, sort of with her other friends. Here we have the Queen of Swords. I've heard, I don't know who or what, I've seen some reviews of this where people like the Queen of Swords, but then also don't feel like she comes across as powerful as she should. I think she's quite beautiful. I think that this is an interesting read in the guidebook because it talks about that she's had a lot of experiences, but not all of them were good, and so that there may be a little bit of coldness to the Queen of Swords, but not to judge her. She's just found it important to protect herself, and if you don't want her kind of honest assessment of things, like don't ask her. Like if you don't want to really know the truth, then don't ask her because she's going to give it to you bluntly. And not always painfully, but she will be blunt about it. So I do think that's quite a lovely Queen of Swords. And then we have the King of Swords. And I really do like that we have his sword, you know, there is a sword there. But I love that he's standing there with the book because, again, the swords is about the intellect. And so I do like that. And I do like that he still has the aviator goggles on his head, because you get that sense, and because we have here like a ship over here, and we have his like almost ceremonial sword, so you get the sense that he's done his adventures, he's gone and he's lived it and he's done those things, and now he's just in the time of his life in which he is focusing on the intellect and taking those experiences and being able to rule better because of them. So I do really like that. Kind of getting random piles going here. Here we have the Pentacles. I think that's stunning. I love this Two of Pentacles. I think this has to be my favorite Two of Pentacles. She's riding one of those bikes with the giant wheels, those old bikes, and the infinity sign is going through the mechanics there, but powered by her own physical power. I just think that is fantastic. And the light, there's a lot of great use of light in this deck. Three of Pentacles. Four of Pentacles. I love this. It's sort of like a piggy bank, a money bank. You can see the coins that are put into it. You know, you put it in the thing and it does the probably. You can just see it's wind up, and then it's going to put the coin into with the other coins to save it. I just think that's fantastic. I love this Five of Pentacles. I love the perspective. Now, it may look as if I'm tilting the card, and that's why you get that sort of tilt, but it's not. It's the way that it has been painted, and I think that Allie Fell did an amazing job with a lot of these cards, but this card in particular, she did just an amazing job with it. There's just something about that slight perspective change, and I do a lot of photography, or I have done in the past, portrait photography and things like that. And there's a lot to be said about just these subtle changes in perspective. And I do think that's something that is amazing in this card. Six of Pentacles. The Seven of Pentacles. That is a notepad and pen. All assessing. The Eight of Pentacles. See, again, you know, this has a very traditional feel to it, but just with metal working, that I think is quite fascinating. Love this one as well. The Nine of Pentacles. I love that hawk. Reminds me of one of the cards in the Druidcraft with a lady in the white dress with the hawk on her arm. That's quite stunning. It's not, that one I don't believe is the Nine of Pentacles. It's just the hawk I was comparing. Here we have the Ten of Pentacles, and I think this is interesting because we have the happy family with two dogs. So even the dog's got a little companion there also. But then we have the fortune teller down here with her tarot cards again. Which I think is quite interesting. You could read so many different things. What is it that she sees? Or is it she, you know, did she foresee that everything was going to be well? Or is she foreseeing something else that's coming up? Like, it's quite evocative there as well. Page of Pentacles, I think, is quite stunning. Knight of Pentacles we looked at. Oops, I got these kind of out of order. Queen of Pentacles and the King of Pentacles have a definite kind of, I don't know, I'm bad with dates, so you can mock me if you will. I want to say like a 20s feel to it. She's got that sort of 20s flapper feel to her. These are probably my least favorite of the Queens. I mean, they're beautiful cards and it works, but they're not my favorite. But I do, you know, they're gorgeous. And then lastly, we have the Cups. The Two of Cups. I love that. Got a very temperance feel to it. And the yin-yang there. So here we have that, what I was talking about. I love this card because we have the Three of Cups. And we have, in the middle, these are all three women. And in the middle we have a woman who's clearly more in the business side. She's wearing the clothing more of that sort of androgynous male clothing that we see in some of the other cards, like the Knight of Swords. And I know that when you can look at these pictures in the back, it shows the accomplishments of all three of these women that have very different paths. And here we can see the aviator goggles here. We actually have sort of like a crystal ball, and she's dressed more in that Arabian look of the world card, and sort of in a fortune tellery sort of garb, and because we also again have the crystal ball, and then we have her over here in more of a traditional woman's dress of the time. And so we have all three of those sort of toasting each other's accomplishments, but having gone after life from very different places, but and just quite, I just think this is a fantastic card of sort of a cohesive female support for each other, even though you're going very different paths. The idea that the point is that we have the choice of what path we go, and that we should be supporting each other on each of those different paths. So I think this is just quite a fascinating card. Four of Cups, definitely looks a little dissatisfied there. Five of Cups, definitely a link to cups and drinking in this particular deck. The Six of Cups. I do really like the Seven of Cups, all the things that he's looking at. You've got dragons, castles, fish. Eight of Cups. This is fantastic with this sort of wording that's going on up here, all the thought processes and the science and everything that's going on in the mind. But then we've got the Cups. This is not my favorite Nine of Cups, but come one, come all. Come be happy. Here we have the Ten of Cups, the Page of Cups with sort of like I think those are called dirigibles in the steampunk genre. She's quite formally attired at the beach. Quite a strange one, to be honest. Knight of Cups, which I think is stunning. I think the Queen of Cups is one of the most powerful of the queens in this particular deck. Just, she's like inside of an airship, and you can kind of see the sky from the window behind her. But she definitely looks extremely powerful. Which you would think, I guess that you would get that more with the Queen of Swords. I think in this particular deck, the Queen of Cups is definitely the strongest. And then we have the King of Cups with his brandy and cigar, looks like. So there we have all of the cards from the Steampunk Tarot. And like I said, it is quite a stunning deck. It is not, as Barbara Moore made the argument for in her book, it's definitely not just a novelty deck. It has a lot of depth to it. The cards shuffle beautifully. They are thin. Some people don't like the thin card stock in some of these types of decks. I actually prefer it because I do rifle shuffle. So making a mess out of it is what I'm doing. Oh, look at what I just did. Do you see that? Mistake. I rifle shuffled them backwards, and now they're all mixed. So I get to go and undo them all. That's lovely. Now they're all mixed up. But they do rifle shuffle beautifully when you do it the correct way. So the cards, it's a very similar cardstock feel to the Tarot of the Hidden Realms. Same thing with the size. The size is about the same as Tarot of the Hidden Realms. So it is a fantastic deck, and it's one that I highly recommend. If you enjoy the steampunk genre, again, highly recommend that you read Soulless, a novel of vampires, werewolves, and parasols. If you want to put your toe in the water of the steampunk genre, very much recommend this book. And as I said, the chariot in this deck is a direct nod to Alexia with her steampunked parasol full of weapons and gadgets for killing vampires and werewolves. Oh my. So there you have it. The Steampunk Tarot by Barbara Moore.